Hi, everyone. This is Jason Burack of Wall Street from Main Street. Welcome back for another Wall Street from Main Street podcast interview. Today's special guest is a first-time guest. He is a really great guest. I'm very happy to have him on. He is Charles Goyette. Now, let me go through his bio before we have him say hi to you guys. He had a radio show called The Charles Goyette Show. It was one of the top libertarian shows for a long time. I believe he stopped that in 2008. It was his last show. He also has two very good books published. He has A Dollar Meltdown, Surviving the Impending Currency Crisis with Gold, Oil, and Other Unconventional Investments. And his newest book is Red and Blue and Broke All Over, Restoring America's Free Economy. On top of this, Charles also has two new newsletters with Weiss Research, investing newsletters. One of them is the Freedom and Prosperity Letter, and the other one is the Wealth and Liberty Alert. And Charles also does a weekly podcast with Ron Paul, who I think is like the hero of the libertarian movement, who's basically woken up pretty much everyone out there. Or one of the guys besides Charles. So thank you very much for joining us here today, Charles.
Jason, great to be on with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Great. And Charles, your bio is probably the longest I've ever read. That is a lot you've already accomplished.
Well, it never slips my mind for a minute how busy I am. Believe me, I get up in the morning and I start and go all day. So.
Well, I'm just very happy you're willing to give our myself and our listeners some time. So hopefully you can answer some pertinent questions from our listeners that they've been wanting to know. Let's jump into our first question. These are economy-related questions, and one of them pertains directly to your Dollar Meltdown book. You authored the book about the dollar meltdown, but it seems the U.S. dollar is strengthening against other fiat currencies, especially in developing markets and developed countries like Japan. Why do you think this is the case?
Well, I'm glad that you phrased it the way that you did, that it's strengthening against other fiat currencies, but the truth is that all currencies are going down, all paper currencies, all fiat currencies, and there's not, to my knowledge, in the world today, a single redeemable currency. You know, I mean, we did have the Swiss franc, at least had, until fairly recently, a 40% statutory gold backing. The Lebanese pound was once the same way, but they're all fiat currencies. And so when I have a certain revulsion to talk about a currency being strong, the dollar strong, the yen strong, the euro strong, the euro's weak, and so on and so forth, because most people, the reason most people get up in the morning when the alarm goes off, and the reason most people go to work sometimes for a job that they don't care for, or the reason most people save money and they defer consumption for the future, the reason people do all those things is for the things that the money that they earn will buy. People save money, people earn money for the things that it will buy. And in truth, all of the currencies of the world buy less and less every year. So, you know, these discussions about, you know, a currency is strong, a currency is weak, I think of it like somebody saying, you know, look, we're on the Lusitania and the ship is going down and we should jump from the Lusitania to the Titanic because the Lusitania's rate of descent is 19 degrees, but the Titanic's only going down at 17 degrees. So I think that's a broad sort of a philosophic question, but I know that implicit in your question is a specific thing like, you know, why haven't we had an episode, for example, of really massive inflation that even though the U.S. dollar today is only worth 3 cents or so versus the $1913 when the Fed was created. You know, why hasn't it just utterly been destroyed and left in smoke and ashes? And, you know, of course, the answer to that is that the monetary authorities have created a massive amount of money. They have created a massive amount of money to purchase the toxic real estate securities that were on the hands of the crony banksters to add those to the portfolio of the Federal Reserve and take them off the portfolios of the private banks. They have created a massive amount of money to purchase downgraded U.S. Treasury debt. The last number I saw on that, by the way, is that for the first 6 months of this year, the Federal Reserve has purchased 110% of all of the U.S. Treasury debt issuance this year. In other words, everything that the Treasury has sold to raise money to operate the government, every bond it's sold has in effect, all things being fungible, has in effect been purchased by the Federal Reserve. It has purchased 110% of U.S. Treasury debt issuance in terms of its quantitative easing securities and U.S. Treasury purchases this year. So the question is, why hasn't this led to a catastrophic, systemic, system-wide economic collapse? Why haven't we gone the way of, Weimar Republic or the way of Zimbabwe or something? And of course, the answer is very clear. The answer is that if the Federal Reserve creates trillions of dollars to add to its monetary base, as it has done, having doubled the monetary base and then doubled it again to 3.4, 3.5 trillion where we are now, nobody has ever said that money will have an extraordinary inflation impact in the economy as long as it's in shrink wrapping in the U.S. Treasury or in shrink wrapping in the basement of the Mariner Eccles building. So the Fed can create purchasing media all day, can blow up its monetary base, expand its balance sheet all day, and as long as that money sits on account and nothing is done with it, it doesn't. As long as banks aren't lending money against the reserves that they have with the Fed in our fractional reserve banking system, then the real high-powered monetary creation potential of the Fed's trillions of dollars of malfeasance doesn't really enter the economy. Now, it has to someday. There's no such thing as, a free lunch. I mean, they purchased real things with it. They purchased real estate or mortgage securities. They purchased U.S. real Treasury debt. And, we can't be guilty of magical thinking. We understand that there have to be consequences of that money at some point. And so we're effectively waiting for those consequences to become visible at the level of consumer prices.
And another thing here, I think a lot of the inflation is going into asset prices. It's not going into the real economy, like you said. There's not that lending and spending yet that the mainstream likes to talk about. And also, besides a lot of the money going into speculation, because when the Fed prints that money and it goes onto the bank sheet reserves, they can start re-levering their balance sheet. They can start using that to create loans outside the United States. They can use that to start speculating on assets. They can use that to buy up whole entire neighborhoods of houses in Las Vegas or Phoenix, and that's what's happening. The asset prices are going up first, and we don't have those consumer prices going up yet to the level that the asset prices have gone up.
There's no question that you're right. And, it is clear that the bubble that has been in formation for a great deal of this process has been the bond bubble or the interest rate bubble. The Fed's effort to force interest rates down to recapitalize the banks, and yet at this point it looks very much like the Federal Reserve has lost control. The Federal Reserve says we're going to keep interest rates down, we're going to provide you forward guidance. We're going to do this, we're going to do that, and then we're going to do the other thing. And what the bond market has said to that since May. It's gone ripping up higher. It's gone ripping much higher, and that compounds the problems really of the monetary authorities substantially. I mean, what happens to the U.S. debt load when interest rates start to climb? The debt becomes a bigger problem. I mean, a 3% increase in the portfolio of Treasury debt, adds another $500 billion to debt financing or to the government's budget every year in debt service. So they're really between a rock and a hard place. But yes, you're correct. We have been caught in many ways between powerful forces of deflation. There's no doubt that we have seen, a massive amount of deflation over the last 5 years in some areas of the economy. There's been massive deflation in real estate prices, particularly during the first few years of the process. But on the other hand, there has been a massive inflation of financial assets. Especially bonds and the stock market, for example, is a perfect example. The correlation between the phases of quantitative easing and each successive wave of the rising stock market, there couldn't be a more clear correlation than that chart.
And I also think, Charles, that a lot of the inflation has been exported due to U.S. dollar pegs or euro pegs or just fixed exchange rates through intervention in the currency markets. You have really, I just read the stories and you hear of the really bad inflation in India, in Brazil, in China for food and energy and some of these other things.
Yeah, you're right. And the massive credit creation in China is another shoe that is yet to fall in this global economic picture, and that won't be a pretty story. There's a lot of denial about it going on right now, but it is a calamity waiting to happen. I mean, this has been, it's still a state-directed economy, and it's been massive malinvestment in China that will have to be liquidated at some point.
Yeah, I completely agree. It's trillions and trillions all over the globe of misallocated capital and resources, which is why I personally think almost every single country in the world is in one degree or another of stagflation.
Yeah.
My next question, Charles, is how much longer do you think the Federal Reserve and other global central banks can keep this game going of financial repression and worsening stagflation?
Well, my view is that they can always, it can always go longer than you think. My view is that, sometimes these markets, they always go higher than you think possible, or on the other side, they always go lower than you think possible. And clearly the monetary authorities can keep this game going and have been able to keep this game going longer than anybody thinks. So my view is, don't expect things to suddenly break down before your very eyes this month or next month, but with a surety that they actually will. Now, I look at it in a little different way. The whole game of the monetary authorities is effectively, look, paper money, fiat money is a confidence game. People take it and exchange it or save it because they are confident that the next person will take it in exchange, will welcome it, and so on and so forth. But the confidence game is breaking down, and on a macro level. It's not just confidence in the paper dollar. The paper dollar, confidence in the paper dollar will reflect confidence in the larger political economic system. But this whole debacle about Syria has been a massive confidence buster in the abilities of the United States government. I mean, we finally reached the point where the government makes representations that the people no longer believe. To me, this is welcome. I mean, it's too bad, but it's welcome news that the people no longer believe it. And it's too bad that the people believe the representations that were made in 2003 marching into that debacle. But, not a day goes by that we don't get another revelation about the extent of the United States government spying, eavesdropping, storing records on the people. And then what have we heard for all these years? Well, they have congressional oversight on this. It's all safe. There's the FISA court, the secret court. Just the very term secret court should make the hair stand up on the back of your neck. But in case it doesn't, you're told that, they're doing this with congressional oversight, and, congressmen can't talk about what they're seeing and what they're doing, but believe me, they've gone in there and there's congressional... But
they're insider trading on all this private secret information, right? They're making millions of dollars a year on insider trades that the rest of us go to jail for, too.
And they make representations to all of us that the next day's revelations prove not to be true. We've seen this over and over this spring and this summer. That they've told us things. The head of the House Intelligence Committee says, when Edward Snowden comes out and says exactly what they're doing, he says he's lying. He's lying. They aren't doing that, and Edward Snowden is lying. And then the successive release of facts, and they actually released the PowerPoint training slides on how the analysts at the NSA are trained to use some of these snooping technologies. And we discover that Mike Rogers of the House Intelligence Committee, who told us that Edward Snowden was lying, is lying himself. He's the oversight guy. And
under oath too, right? Isn't that a felony?
Oh, listen, it's been serial misrepresentations under oath. Yeah, look, Martha Stewart, her representations were innocent compared to what these people do, and she went to jail for her trouble.
Yeah, but the lawmakers, I guess, view they're above the laws, right? I think that's part of the problem.
That is a big part of the problem, but we can be hopeful, I think, and especially in the current environment, that's all changing. The Fed says that we're in charge of money and that we're keeping interest rates down, but they can't do it. the NSA, the Patriot Act people, and so on, say, oh, don't worry, we're not snooping on you. But it turns out that indeed they are. They say we're not keeping records, but indeed they're keeping records. Sure. In Washington, they're all aflame about a chance to make some partisan hay about, what did Hillary know about Benghazi, and why did Ambassador Stevens die, and why did they just, why did they have the Marines there in time, and so on. But of course, they're like bees in the same colony, and they have different jobs, the Republicans and Democrats do, but they never sting each other. So they should have used the hearings about Benghazi to tell us what the United States government was doing in Benghazi. I mean, Benghazi isn't the capital city. What is the United States ambassador doing there instead of in Tripoli? And you find out, that the place is crawling with CIA agents. There are more CIA agents at the so-called embassy than there were diplomats when the trouble hit the fan. And it was a CIA right around the corner. It was a CIA weapons dump and headquarters. And it becomes more clear with each passing day that the CIA or the United States government was effectively using that Benghazi outpost to transfer weapons by way of Turkey to rebels in Syria, including Al-Qaeda affiliates. So all of this stuff is suddenly starting to break, and even the partisans who said, oh no, we want to use this as a means of getting Hillary and ruining her in 2016 and getting Barack Obama, are beginning to scratch their head and realize it's not just the partisan fight that matters. All of these guys are undermining our rights as private citizens. They're trampling on the Constitution with wars that are not declared. Nobody ever voted to send rebels to Al-Qaeda affiliates in Libya, and yet a massive amount of black budget money is being spent to do so. So I mean, the whole system is now standing out there, and it's almost naked and open to view. And so I think we've got a real good chance now of seeing the people awaken and reject all of this interventionism, foreign interventionism, monetary interventionism, interventionism in our commercial activities and our private lives, and so on and so forth. That, at least to me, Jason, is the outcome to be hoped for out of all this.
Yeah, and hopefully both political parties get exposed for not having really any differences whatsoever. In my humble opinion, I think there's very little differences, if any, between both political parties. There are cosmetic differences. They just disagree on where to spend all the loot that they get from the Fed and they steal from the taxpayer. And then, when it really comes down to it, they both use Keynesian economics.
Sure, they all worship in the same church. They have the same priesthood. I mean, I don't know how transparent this has to be. You had Alan Greenspan, appointed by Ronald Reagan, a Republican, reappointed by Bill Clinton, a Republican. You have Ben Bernanke, appointed by George W. Bush, reappointed by Barack Obama. I mean, it's the same priesthood under Republicans and Democrats alike with the same policy. And, of course, the Washington Press Corps, they waste all our time with these, little minor inside the Beltway battles. Is it going to be Janet Yellen? Is it going to be Larry Summers? Is it going to be some of their whack job? But you're right. They all sing from the same hymnal. They follow the same creed. It's the same catechism for both of them. They're all discredited Keynesian whack jobs, in my view. Sorry to interrupt you, and even the Republicans who claim to, want capitalism, and some of them even mention free markets, they're hypocritical too, because then they want, this welfare, they want this humongous warfare state, and then they're giving away freebies for Medicare Part D to buy votes. It's just total hypocrisy from both parties. Yeah, it's corrupted there. One of my friends likes to say, you can tell it's kind of the end times of a system when you see the extent of the plunder and the looting. They're stealing everything that's not nailed down, and they effectively are. I saw in the press today about the flim-flam that Eric Cantor, the House, I guess he's the House, what is he, the House Majority, whatever he is, House Majority Leader, or is he whip? Is he the whip? Whatever he is, he's... I don't follow politics that much. Well, you're wise, because there's no redemption in politics, but he's working on a deal that will, effectively give cover to the perpetuation of Obamacare. All of these guys are the same. They're economic central planners. And if there were people on the national scene that had a chance of being politically viable, that understood the evils of economic central planning, why economic central planning must fail, what is functionally wrong with central. After all, people plan other things. Why is economic central planning always such a calamity? And actually, that's really a major thesis of Red and Blue and Broke All Over, is that people have to begin to understand, have to spend some time learning why it is that freedom actually works, why freedom creates prosperity, why is it that economic central planning is a debacle, why is it that fiat money is always destined for destruction. People have to begin to understand these things, but the Republicans and the Democrats are on the same page on interventionism, monetary policy, economic philosophy, the national police state, the surveillance state, the military-industrial complex, the surveillance-industrial complex. Both of them, they have their bread buttered on the same side.
And Jesse Ventura, I think, said it best. He said, these guys remind me of professional wrestling. You have the good guy and the bad guy fighting on camera, and then after the camera comes off, they're partying together, shaking hands, having beers, having fun together. So that just seems the way to me. It just seems like two rival pirate groups there, and they're just trying to fight over who gets the spoils that are stolen. That's just my opinion.
Well, I certainly agree with you. I mean, somebody else said it'd be a hideous sight if you don't even want to imagine. You want to avert your eyes so that you don't see what these people are doing in the basement together of Capitol Hill after the legislative lights go out. I mean, it's just it's wonderful.
They're all buddy. Yeah. I worked in D.C. for a little, in politics for a long time ago, and I just got disgusted of it, and then that and the stock market crashing helped wake me up to the truth. My next question has to do with political process and Ron Paul. Ron Paul was able to help wake up and educate millions of Americans and foreigners on what's really going on in the United States government and in the U.S. economy, but he was not able to slow down the growth of big government and the welfare state. Do you think Rand Paul could make much of a difference as president in 2016, or is it way too late to stop the growth of the warfare state?
Yeah, my view is that he can't, and that all of this will be ended of its own inertia, that all of this will be ended by its own weight. In other words, that de facto bankruptcy will end the warfare state, de facto bankruptcy will end the welfare state, that it will all come crashing down, the state socialist programs of the Republicans and Democrats will all effectively be repudiated by their failure to meet the obligations that they have made. And sometimes people's memories, cultural, national memories, last for a couple of generations. For a couple of generations after the Weimar Republic inflation, the Germans were terrified of any proposal to print money. They had a long memory about it. Americans, after the Great Depression, the next generation after the Great Depression, they were savers. They were interested in saving and building a nest egg and so on. That was an instinct that was subverted by the creation of, or actually by the widening of the welfare state and the social state, Social Security and so on, that tried to train Americans that the state would take care of them, and they didn't have to really be that conscientious about saving for their own retirement. All these programs will be discredited. All these state interventions will be discredited in the near term, in the fullness of time.
And also Keynesianism, Charles, which said that economic growth and prosperity comes from consuming a lot more than you produce.
Yeah, this is such utter madness. It's surprising to me. I once did a talk about it. Said basically, here are 6 things that no child would believe if you told a child that they could spend their way to prosperity. I like to use the Keynesian example about how it's a good one. It's if you were in an economic environment in which things were slow, depressed, repressed, in recession or something, you could fix it by, now listen to this. This is a perfect encapsulation of Keynesianism. You could fix it if the monetary authorities would go to the town dump and they'd get a whole bunch of empty bottles and they'd stick banknotes in the bottles and then bury those bottles down deep in the town dump and then cover them up, that the economy would be cured by the by the mere act of leaking out that there are banknotes buried in that town dump. Because of the consequent flood of economic activity, people would come to town, they'd buy shovels, they'd rent motel rooms, they'd gas up their car to get to the town dump, they would dig, and they would need meals, and so on and so forth. And all of this activity would create
broken window.
Yeah, it'd create prosperity. And of course, yeah, you're right. The question is, all of that activity was for banknotes that already existed in the first place. That that it could have been used to create something of real value. All that human labor and effort that was just used to dig in the town dump, instead of double effort. Somebody had to dig to bury the bottles of banknotes in the first place, and then somebody had to come around and turn big holes into little holes, or little holes into big holes to dig them back up. The wealth that it represented all existed in the first place. It's just such utter madness that a child wouldn't believe it. And yet, we have these graybeards in Washington that take this stuff seriously, and it has its kind of economic or intellectual karmic consequences for the nation. We're beginning to see them.
Why do you think Keynesian economics has lasted this long when it should have been killed for good during the 70s stagflation?
Very easy. It's lasted this long because it's provided intellectual cover. As thin as it is, as transparent as it is, it provided intellectual cover. These are the intellectual classes providing cover to the governing classes to do what they wanted to do anyway. And what they wanted to do anyway was spend money and buy votes. And now, suddenly, did they want to be prudent? No. Did they want to tell their constituents that, no, they couldn't provide them something for nothing, that they couldn't give them No, they wanted to tell them there's a free lunch. Come to the trough. Have at it, little piggies. And so Keynesianism provided them intellectual cover to get away with this flim-flam. And so it's very clear to me now. I don't contend that, most of the people in Washington and the governing classes and the people who vote and stuff really understand what Keynesianism is, other than, kind of the soundbite or the bumper sticker, we got to stimulate the economy, we need to, but the truth is that, it could be taking off your shirt and dancing naked in the moonlight, and they would do it if it provided them cover to do what they wanted to do anyway, which is buy votes and perpetuate their hold on office.
That's a very good point. And over the long term, Keynesianism does not work. I think the only reason it has worked this long is because the United States was so much more prosperous from mostly free market capitalism over many decades, and there was capital formation for many decades. There was savings and surplus and entrepreneurship and all these other and value creation, all these other things. And now that those things that produce the wealth are starting to slow, Keynesianism is starting to be showed for the flaws that it has.
Well, you're right. In my view, it failed in the 30s. It failed in the Great Depression, and we didn't recover from the Great Depression until government spending was slashed after World War II. But it failed in the stagflation of the 70s, even as it's failed in this current 5-year-old crisis. But you're right. If you look back, GDP growth in this country in the 50s and 60s, GDP growth averaged over 4%. And it was about 3% in the 70s and 80s. Over the last decade, it's been about 2%. In fact, for the first 6 months of this year, we're below 2. We're 1.8% of subpar growth. So, it's game over. They get less and less bang for the buck because they have stretched the rubber band of borrowing and printing money and spending it just as far as it can go, and it will end in a major economic calamity, and the American people who do not understand the things that we're talking about will be badly victimized by this process, and it is, I think, apparent that our liberties will be victimized along the way.
Well, I hope things get better in the long term. I do see that Ron Paul and yourself and Rand Paul are starting to wake people up. It is slow, though. and most of the people are not as passionate about liberty and Austrian school economics as me and you. So hopefully we can get the message out there to wake some people up once in a while. Maybe they'll read a book, maybe they'll listen to a couple of your Ron Paul weekly podcasts, which is, I think, a good place to start, and they'll go from there. Because all this stuff that we just said, Charles, when I first woke, I didn't know any of the stuff, but it made so much sense to me initially. I was like, how come I wasn't taught this in schools? How come the mainstream media didn't talk about this? It all makes so much sense. Why is all the stuff they say on TV doesn't make any sense at all to me?
Yeah. Well, you're right. They've had a chokehold on information. When I was in college, it was all Keynesian nonsense, and it was all Paul Samuelson textbooks and so on. And we didn't have the advantage of the internet then. That you could go online and check this stuff. And so if you were really dedicated, I suppose you could go into the university libraries and maybe you'd find something that challenged all of this stuff. And there were people out there trying to spread the word. There was
those books are not there anymore.
Yeah,
they're gone.
Yeah,
they got rid of them.
Yeah, it was really tough. But they can't keep us in the dark any longer. So that's the great thing about the age in which we live. Podcast, the internet. It's the decentralization of the media and information and learning, and it's it's the best single thing in our intellectual lives today.
Well, Charles, I'm going to wrap up the interview. I have a lot of other questions to ask you, but due to time constraints, I don't want to keep you here too long. So please tell our listeners more about all the different work you have, like your newsletter and your books and your Ron Paul weekly podcast.
Well, you did a good job. I have the Dollar Meltdown and Red and Blue and Broke All Over. Those are available at your favorite bricks and mortar bookstore, if there are any anymore. They're usually available. They're available online at Amazon. The Dollar Meltdown is still relevant about the process that we are going through, the ending of fiat currencies. The world's been through these things before, and so there are sort of templates of the way the things transpire. People asked me when I was on the book tour for that book if I would write a book about what could be done about it. So I wrote Red and Blue and Broke All Over with the thought that, if people really begin to understand, why free prices are important, why should prices, why is it better when shortages are rationed by prices rather than by bureaucrats and by, board members at the Fed or something? Why does that create for prosperity? Why do good things happen when prices are free to move and bad things happen when they're not? So for that reason, I wrote Red and Blue and Broke All Over. It is a great primer, even for people that, are familiar with Austrian school economics. And then I write particularly the Freedom and Prosperity Letter. You can just Google Freedom and Prosperity Letter. My publisher is Weiss Research, venerable publisher of investment market commentary and newsletters. It's called the Freedom and Prosperity Newsletter, a monthly to keep up to date on latest developments, topical developments, current events in the markets, and investment opportunities, and more.
And please tell our listeners the website so they can listen to the weekly Ron Paul podcast, because I know they want to listen to that.
Yeah, you could actually just Google Ron Paul, the weekly podcast. You can get it from a number of places. I think I'm reopening my website again in a week or two, so I'll just give them my website and I'll be posting them on there. It's not active yet. It's been inactive for some years. I've been so busy writing, I let it go silent, but I'm reopening it in about 2 weeks, and that's charlesgoyette.com.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your time, Charles, and hopefully we can have you on again soon.
Jason, great to speak with you. Thanks for the work that you're doing.